What if I told you that one of the most complex, coordinated operations in U.S. history didn't happen in a war zone overseas, but right here in the quiet suburbs of Los Angeles? At 6:30 in the morning, 6 federal tactical teams moved in at once: FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security, executing a synchronized breach that looked less like a police raid and more like a military strike. Within minutes, they uncovered an industrial-scale fentanyl lab capable of producing over 5,000 pills an hour, hidden behind a single-story home. But that was only the beginning. Within 12 hours, 11 more locations across California fell in a wave of coordinated raids. The sheer scale stunned even federal analysts. Over 8 tons of narcotics, 400 weapons, and $11 million in cash seized. What investigators uncovered next would redefine how America thinks about national security. Behind the drugs was a logistics and financial web stretching from Long Beach to Hong Kong. An operation that used encrypted networks, blockchain laundering, and corporate shell structures identical to those seen in military supply chains. This wasn't just organized crime, it was economic warfare, designed to infiltrate legitimate systems, mimic civilian trade routes, and exploit the gaps between financial oversight and law enforcement. Federal strategists began calling it the cartel's shadow command. Tonight, we're going to break down how Operation Crossline and its successor, Operation Sentinel, exposed a new kind of battlefield, where intelligence, finance, and logistics collide in a war that never makes the front page. Every move, every transaction, every shipment was part of a strategy that mirrors the precision of modern military doctrine. Stay with me until the end, because every detail will change how you understand warfare in the 21st century. And if you're passionate about global defense, intelligence, and military strategy, give this video a like, hit subscribe, and share it to help me bring you the next frontline analysis.
For decades, America fought its wars with soldiers, aircraft, and steel. But today, the most powerful weapons don't fire bullets. They move silently through bank servers, trade routes, and data streams. The cartels understood that faster than anyone else. When the FBI raided those suburban labs in Los Angeles, they weren't just seizing drugs. They were stepping onto a new kind of battlefield, one made of numbers, encryption, and money that never sleeps. What shocked investigators wasn't just the production capacity. 5,000 fentanyl pills per hour. It was the rhythm. Every shipment, every payment followed a perfect 7-day cycle. It was military precision, but applied to crime. The DEA analysts compared it to a logistics operation, straight out of a Pentagon playbook. Scheduled convoys, synchronized routes, and redundant supply lines to prevent disruption. That's when federal agents realized they weren't fighting street dealers anymore. They were fighting an organization that thought like an army. And honestly, that's the part that hits me the most. We often imagine criminals as reckless or chaotic, but what the data showed was discipline. Someone out there had studied how U.S. forces manage global deployments and then mirrored that strategy for illegal trade. Each company handled one specific role: procurement, packaging, transport, or billing, like divisions in a military unit. If one cell fell, the rest continued, perfectly insulated. That's not coincidence, that's doctrine. To trace it, the Treasury Department built what they called the Crossline system, a radar scanning for anomalies across the country. It mapped over 100 accounts with identical patterns. Small deposits, under the federal reporting threshold, moving in waves every 7 days, and converging on shell companies in Long Beach and Nevada. It was as if someone had built a digital supply line, invisible to the human eye, but glowing under the right analytical lens. Think about that. In traditional warfare, you destroy the enemy's logistics and you win. In this new war, logistics is the enemy. The cartels weaponized the American economy itself, using legitimate trade, shipping routes, and corporate law to protect their operations. It's an uncomfortable truth, but it forces us to admit that the front line isn't over there anymore. It's embedded inside our own systems. As someone who has studied military strategy for years, I see this as the evolution of conflict. What we're witnessing is a form of financial insurgency, a campaign to undermine national security, not through violence, but through infiltration. And the U.S. response, by shifting focus from physical raids to tracing money flows, is a lesson in modern warfare: adapt or be outmaneuvered. This shift from guns to networks marks the turning point of Operation Crossline, and it set the stage for what came next: a global counteroffensive unlike anything the U.S. Justice Department had ever attempted. Let's move deeper into that operation, because this next phase, known as Sentinel, would transform a domestic drug case into a worldwide intelligence war.
When the first phase of Operation Crossline ended, the FBI thought they had cracked the code. Dozens of labs were gone, hundreds of arrests made, millions of dollars frozen. But within 3 weeks, new financial signals began to appear. Different accounts, different companies, yet the same 7-day rhythm pulsing quietly beneath the system. That's when Washington realized something terrifying. The network hadn't been destroyed, it had adapted. So the mission evolved. What started as a regional crackdown in California turned into Operation Sentinel, a coordinated global counteroffensive. And I don't use that word lightly. This wasn't just a law enforcement effort anymore. It was an intelligence war fought across borders, currencies, and encrypted systems. For the first time, financial data, satellite imagery, and logistics tracking were merged into one unified command dashboard. It looked less like a police operation and more like a war room. From my experience studying joint military operations, Sentinel reminded me of the way NATO handles multi-theater missions: real-time intelligence sharing, interagency tasking, and command synchronization. The U.S. Treasury, FinCEN, Europol, Interpol, and even the NSA were feeding data into one live system. Every red dot on that screen represented not a target on a battlefield, but a transaction, an account, a warehouse, a freight container moving through the global supply chain. Then came the breakthrough. Analysts traced several crypto wallets in Nevada to a shell real estate firm in Las Vegas. On paper, it was buying land for warehouses. In reality, it was masking chemical storage sites. From there, shipments were funneled back to California, disguised as recycled goods, while parallel financial trails surfaced in Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Panama. Over 800 digital wallets were identified, each acting as a relay, splitting and reassembling money faster than any investigator could follow. One NSA report described it as a financial nervous system the size of a small bank. And I'll be honest with you, this part gives me chills. Because when I looked into how these systems were structured, it became clear that the cartels were no longer fighting to hide, they were fighting to exist within the system, to become part of the legitimate economy itself. That's not crime anymore. That's infiltration. But here's the part that most people never hear. Sentinel wasn't just about shutting accounts or seizing money. It was about coordination. True international, real-time coordination. For the first time, encrypted data was being decrypted and matched between continents within minutes, not weeks. The U.S. Financial Command acted like an air traffic controller, directing enforcement teams from Europe to Asia, cutting off each node before it could rebuild. It was the digital equivalent of air superiority: control the space, and you control the war. And slowly, it worked. Within 2 weeks, 60 accounts were frozen, 23 shell companies revoked, and hundreds of containers held at Long Beach. Across Asia, nations like China, Singapore, and Malaysia began demanding end-user certificates for chemical exports, a move that crippled the flow of raw materials to cartel labs. For the first time, the supply chain broke before the drugs could even reach American soil. To me, Sentinel proved something extraordinary, that modern warfare doesn't always require soldiers. Sometimes it's fought by data analysts, by forensic accountants,
by coders tracing the flow of billions across digital borders. And the people sitting behind those screens, they're the quiet warriors of this century. But this victory came at a cost. The networks learned. They split, they shrank, they hid in new systems, which means the war didn't end. It evolved again. And that's where we're heading next. Into the dark space where the cartels learn to think like militaries, using encryption, decentralization, and AI to fight back. Stay with me, because what comes next blurs the line between organized crime and modern warfare.
When Operation Sentinel cut off the cartel's global funding lines, many thought it was over. But history teaches us one thing. No enemy ever disappears. They adapt. And what happened next felt less like the collapse of a criminal empire and more like the tactical retreat of a trained army regrouping in the shadows. The Sinaloa network didn't die. It decentralized. Within weeks, federal intelligence picked up fragments of activity across Arizona, Nevada, and Texas. Small, independent cells, each handling one function of the old system. No single leader, no central hub, just autonomous units connected by encrypted networks, each one capable of surviving if the others fell. It was a near-perfect mirror of what the Pentagon calls network-centric warfare, where flexibility and communication replace hierarchy and command. And I've got to be honest, as someone who studied military structures for years, this transformation floored me. You could literally overlay a map of these new cartel cells onto a battlefield command diagram, and the logic would be the same: decentralized control, rapid mobility, adaptive communication. They had learned from the world's best, from us. Reports showed that former logistics experts, IT contractors, and even ex-military advisors had been quietly recruited to design this new infrastructure. They built encrypted tracking systems that automatically deleted data every 72 hours and split financial flows into microtransactions that were nearly impossible to trace. Each group specialized in its domain. One handled crypto transfers, another managed supply logistics, another oversaw transport across state lines. No one saw the full picture, a structure straight out of modern military doctrine. Think about that for a moment. These weren't just drug traffickers anymore. They were operational strategists using tactics you'd expect from a special operations command. They exploited the gaps between agencies, between jurisdictions, and even between international laws, the same way insurgent forces exploit terrain in asymmetric warfare. To make things worse, they began using corporate fronts as human shields, legitimate businesses layered between shell entities, just like military units use civilian cover in urban warfare. And when one node was exposed, the rest went dark within minutes. It was brutal efficiency, and yet strangely familiar to anyone who's ever studied battlefield strategy. What I find most chilling is how fast they learned. The US government took decades to build real-time intelligence sharing after the Cold War. The cartel built their version in less than 6 months. They leveraged blockchain not just for money, but for communication, embedding messages in microtransactions, hiding orders inside code. And suddenly, this wasn't a cartel in the traditional sense. It was a self-replicating digital insurgency. And here's where it gets personal for me. Watching this unfold, I realized that crime and warfare have merged. When a non-state actor uses encryption, financial intelligence, and logistics at this level, they've crossed into military territory, not by force, but by sophistication. This is no longer about chasing criminals. It's about defending national systems. But even as the cartels perfected their decentralized playbook, the US was learning too. In Washington, analysts began treating these operations like counterinsurgency campaigns, not just tracking drugs or money, but dismantling ecosystems. They started thinking like soldiers again, not just investigators. And that shift would set the stage for the final phase, a campaign that blurred the line between finance, intelligence, and national defense itself. Because what came next wasn't just about shutting down an enemy network. It was about redefining how a nation fights back in the age of invisible wars.
Stay with me, because in the next chapter, we'll see how the battlefield of the 21st century moved from the front lines straight into the financial system.
For most of modern history, we've been taught that wars are fought with weapons, armies, and firepower. But what if I told you that the next great battlefield isn't a desert or a city, it's your bank account? That's not an exaggeration. In the aftermath of Operation Sentinel, the United States discovered that its financial system, the very foundation of its strength, had become a target, and defending it would require a new kind of warfare. When I first read the Treasury's internal report, I couldn't believe how closely it resembled a military operations plan. Every transaction was mapped, every corporate entity labeled like a tactical unit, and every money trail traced like a supply line under fire. For the first time, the US government began to treat financial intelligence as a form of national defense. And honestly, I think that's one of the smartest evolutions in modern security thinking. Here's what that looked like in practice. The Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department formed a joint command hub, where analysts worked side by side with cyber experts, data engineers, and field agents. The room had the same feel as a command center in a war zone. Live feeds, encrypted communications, and a digital map pulsing with alerts from banks around the world. They weren't tracking troop movements anymore. They were tracking money flows. And in many ways, that was even harder. Across the Atlantic, Europol and Interpol joined in. In Asia, partners in Singapore, Malaysia, and Hong Kong began phrasing suspicious transactions in real time. For the first time in history, intelligence agencies and financial regulators operated as a single network, an alliance not built on military treaties, but on shared data. It was a quiet revolution in how nations defend themselves. To put it simply, this was economic warfare, and it was working. Within 72 hours, over $200 million in cartel funds were intercepted before they could cross the border. Banks were ordered to flag every transaction linked to logistics or industrial chemicals. Customs launched smart container tracking systems that could identify suspicious cargo within minutes instead of weeks. Suddenly, the cartel's biggest weapon, their money, was being turned against them. And here's my personal take. This was the moment the US stopped reacting and started strategizing. Instead of chasing criminals down highways and ports, the government began cutting off their oxygen supply, their capital. It's the same logic generals use on the battlefield. If you want to win a war, you don't just fight the soldiers, you cut off their fuel, food, and communications. Sentinel had proven that idea in the digital era. Of course, none of this came without cost. Hundreds of small logistics companies went bankrupt when their accounts were frozen for investigation. Dozens of real estate projects halted mid-construction while ownership was verified. It was a messy, imperfect war. But that's what happens when the front line runs through your own economy. And yet, the results spoke for themselves. The volume of synthetic narcotics seized in the first quarter after the operation dropped dramatically. For the first time in years, the flow was slowing. To me, this marked a defining moment in US defense strategy. We've entered an age where security is no longer measured in missiles or manpower, but in how fast we can detect, trace, and disrupt hostile financial movements. The heroes of this new era aren't just soldiers or spies. They're data analysts, forensic accountants, and cyber defenders who fight with code instead of rifles. And that realization sets up the final chapter of this story, the dawn of a new kind of conflict, where the boundaries between war, crime, and technology blur completely. Because after Sentinel, America learned that even when the shooting stops, the war for control of the system never really ends.
When Operation Sentinel finally closed, Washington called it a victory. 182 people indicted, 67 companies dismantled, over $300 million frozen across 4 continents. On paper, the mission was a triumph. But in the intelligence world, we have a saying: a quiet battlefield doesn't mean the war is over. Because even as the headlines faded, the system began to shift again. The cartel didn't collapse, it fragmented. Smaller, faster, more agile cells replaced the old command structure.
Instead of one giant network, there were dozens of micro-networks scattered across states and continents, each invisible on its own, but connected through encrypted ledgers, decentralized finance, and artificial intelligence trading bots that could move money across borders in seconds. To the untrained eye, it looked like chaos, but to those of us who study military strategy, it was evolution. This was Cartel 4.0, the guerrilla version of financial warfare. They no longer needed large banks or physical cash. Their new weapons were digital wallets, NFTs, and micro-investment shells. The war had gone underground, not in the jungles or deserts, but deep inside the blockchain. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The US knows it. That's why the Department of Homeland Security launched its 12-month economic surveillance program. 200 commercial banks were ordered to install early warning systems that flag unusual payment behavior. Customs deployed AI-driven container scanners that can cross-reference shipments with financial data in real time. Even the real estate market, once a haven for hidden capital, now faces constant audit by the Treasury's financial intelligence units. But despite all these measures, the threat isn't going away. It's just changing form. And I'll be honest with you, that's what keeps me up at night. Because technology is evolving faster than regulation ever can. Every time law enforcement builds a new fire mall, someone somewhere is already writing the code to slip through it. Yet, I'm not pessimistic. If anything, this is the moment for clarity. Operation Sentinel wasn't just an investigation. It was a warning and a blueprint. It showed that national defense in the 21st century depends on one thing: speed of adaptation. The faster a nation can integrate data, intelligence, and finance, the safer it becomes. That's the new arms race, not in missiles, but in algorithms. And I think there's something almost poetic in that. The same systems humans built to trade, to innovate, to connect are now the new front lines of conflict. Whether we like it or not, wars today are being fought through code, through currency, through invisible networks pulsing under our fingertips. The soldiers of tomorrow won't just march, they'll analyze, decrypt, and defend. As the dust settles from Sentinel, one lesson stands above all. Security is no longer about walls or weapons, it's about awareness. If we can see the pattern, we can stop the threat. But if we look away, even for a moment, it will evolve again. So stay informed, stay curious, and remember, every story like this reveals how fragile and yet how powerful our systems truly are. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. And if you care about the future of global defense, intelligence, and the unseen wars shaping our world, give this video a like. Hit subscribe and share it with others who believe that knowledge is the first line of defense. Because the next war has already begun, and it's being fought in places you can't see, but absolutely need to understand.